This is the Instant Speed Podcast, brought to you by Red Riot Games. You can visit Red Riot Games using the link in the description of this video or podcast link, or wherever you're listening to it, you can find it. Guaranteed, promise you. All right, before we get to our guest, Darick Oswalt, aka Charmer, we are going to hit the news and all the facts coming your way, starting with, well, happy 2nd anniversary, Flesh and Blood. It's been swell, even though I've only been knee-deep in this for a few months. I promise you that there are many more birthdays to come, so cheers to you, and thanks for an awesome game. Tales of Aria Unlimited have basically leaked. When is that coming out? Well, November 12th. A little bit after the U.S. Nationals, but a day before the Canadian Nationals, I guess, which is another piece of information for you. The fact that the Canada National Championship date has been set. It was kind of up in the air for a while, but it has been locked in for November's 12th to 13th, occurring in Toronto, Ontario. My hometown. Feels good. So if you are in Canada and you're qualified, start making those travel choices, and if necessary, you can always stay with me. You can ride the couch. Feels good. All right, FABTCG.com is also featuring a really cool article out there right now that digs into some of the more obscure rulings of the new cards and abilities, such as Frostbite and etc. So if you have some questions about those, or just want to get brushed up on your judging, let's say, or you want to sound smart, check out that article. And speaking of smart, we do have a nifty and articulate and awesomely insightful guest to the show. That is Darick Oswalt, aka Charmer, joins us on the Instant Speed Podcast. The Instant Speed Podcast is overjoyed to welcome mainstay of the CCG broadcast community, a pro's pro of casting. He's got deep roots within the Elder Scrolls Legends as well as Runeterra. We welcome to the show Charmer. Charmer, it's nice to have you on the show, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm already laughing at the idea that I'm a pro's pro, but I do appreciate the compliment. And I am excited to talk about Flesh and Blood because this game has kind of eaten up all of my free time lately.
Well, that's where we would like to dig into first, is the quote-unquote origin story, as everybody who has been on this show so far, which is not a lot of people, this is only episode 5, but everybody's had a pretty thick lore, they associated with them when it comes to card games, and you're no different from that. Where did you begin on your card game journey that brought you to eventually Flesh and Blood and your experiences with Flesh and Blood?
When you had told me we were going to cover the origin story, I assumed how I got into Flesh and Blood. I didn't realize we were doing this giant historical lexicon, which would be a bit of a nightmare to cover in its entirety. So,
but like, as long as it doesn't, don't start it off with when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much.
Okay, we'll skip ahead a couple years. So I learned to count by playing blackjack with my grandma. That was my kind of indoctrination to card games. I learned how to play euchre at a very young age, and poker, because that was just what my grandparents did when they watched me. And so I fell in love with cards. And then you flash forward to 1994, right? I'm a little 9-year-old boy going to a local comic and gaming shop. And there's this game, Magic the Gathering. And it's got cool dragons, right? And wizards and all the stuff that you love when you're that age. And so we picked it up and we started playing it, me and a couple of friends. And that led us to play a number of other card games. If there was a card game from the 90s and the aughts that was a physical card game, I've probably played it and or ran tournaments for it. So yes, everybody knows Magic, but at the time there was also like Marvel Overpower before the Versus system, then the Versus system. There was Pokemon, a Harry Potter card game. Everybody knows Yu-Gi-Oh, but there was like Wyvern and a bunch of offshoots. I mean, there was an Alien versus Predator card game. Obviously, Decipher was really big for a time, both with Star Wars, Star Trek, early aughts was Lord of the Rings, and so on and so forth. And so as a young boy, I fell in love with card games. And then as a teen, because I was just up there all the time and I knew everything, they actually hired me to handle most of the gaming stuff. So that's when I started being in charge of running the events, and I would have to learn games so that I could demo them to customers. I would travel to weekend shows and travel to stuff like Gen Con. And so I've been playing card games for a really long time. And eventually man meets a woman, man falls in love with woman, and I wanted to get married. So I got out of Magic, sold my entire collection basically to pay for my wedding.
Okay, I was gonna say this sounded like there was like, there's like this situation, because it kind of, the way that you presented that whole thing, like eventually I want to get married, so, and in my head I'm like, was that like a concession that you had to make to your wife? That
Oh, no.
Yeah.
My wife used to go like 2 events with me, and she's all for it, but it was mostly a realization that I wanted to like have a nice wedding and do those sorts of things, but I also wanted to transition. So right around the same time as when digital card games started to pop up, Soulforge, Hearthstone, etc. And so I wanted to make that transition, and I wanted to kind of get out of Magic, but I was still playing Magic. So really it was like I had Power 9 stuff, I had dual lands, I had all the vintage stuff, and I sold all of that, and then I kept enough to play casually. And when sealed events would pop up, my like running arrangement with a buddy of mine who still has his full collection, has a full vault, has an extra insurance rider on his house, the whole nine. We'll go together, and he'll pay for my entry, and then I just give him all the winnings, but I still get the joy playing sealed events. And so that's kind of how I've been playing Magic since then. But I got out of physical card games, and a lot of it was just because I think my work in the gaming space, like for a store, soured me a bit on the experience, if I'm being entirely honest. And it's one of the reasons that I didn't get back into physical card games for a long time, because I like playing the game. The game is what attracts me, and what I don't like doing is feeling like I have to do a bunch of extra homework on markets, right? Magic got to the point where, at least in my life personally, because of my involvement with a local game store and things like that, where I was going to shows and I was spending more time trading and basically like day trading stocks, if you will, and doing those things, than I was actually caring about Magic. And so by getting myself out of that space, I actually found myself enjoying the game a lot more. And there was a lot of hesitancy for me to dive into Flesh and Blood, because I didn't want to revisit that. That was one of the big things that kept me from trying it when it first launched. But eventually I got worn down by some friends, and I gave it a try, and it's incredibly well designed. I love the game. And so now I'm playing it, and it's eating up a ton of my free time.
I kind of want to rewind a little bit over here, where it comes down to it, where you're saying you had to sell some cards to actually, pay for the wedding that you wanted to have. And it just, that sort of decision tree of like, do I want this time walk, or do I want an open bar? Like, I think that those are the kinds of, depends who you are ultimately, but you're right. Like, it got to a point where I think like Magic became, I don't say a game within a game, but it is a limited resource that people want and continue to want. And that we were talking about the Power 9 and such, and just hanging on to those. And how many of those do you still have right now?
I don't have any of it. I completely got out back then. Anything that was, I think, $20 or more, I got rid of at the time. And mind you, this was back in like, the late aughts, early teens, when I was in that process. Like, I got married in 2007, but my process of getting out was also extended, because that's the other thing, right? That's the annoying thing. Everyone always talks about how your Magic collection is like a store of wealth in many ways, right? They almost treat it like Bitcoin. Like, hey, it's an investment. If I buy this card, I can get my money back. So they kind of use that to justify the expenses in their mind. But it's not like, if you want to get that exact value back, you can snap your fingers and you just get it. There is loops and hoops and all sorts of things that you need to jump through, or you take a hit on it, right? And so at the time, I didn't want to take a huge hit on it, because I had a bunch of expensive things. It's incredibly more expensive now, but even back then it was expensive. And so I was waiting until I got the prices for them that I wanted. And so that meant it took a span of years. And so I think people who think like, hey, if I want to get out, like I can get out tomorrow, just know that there is a process involved, and you might be taking a big hit on that if you don't have like a buyer lined up or something nice and easy. So,
well, that's kind of,
I don't own any of that anymore. I don't own any Power 9, any duels, any of the expensive stuff. I got completely out because again, I wanted to play Magic. I didn't want to play MTG Finance. That was ultimately what it came down to me. And at that point in my life, the MTG Finance part was more of my time and more of my effort than the game was. And I didn't enjoy that or like it. So
yeah, there's oftentimes conversations that kind of float around that I'm privy to, or in discords here and there that I'm part of, where you see people discussing the fact it's like, oh, a case of this is now for this much. Like, if you open this one card, like, you're pretty much paid for that entire case or that box. Like, I just need to open these 2 cards and I paid for everything. Everything else is profit. Well, yeah, it's profit, but to what degree? I mean, I've started sort of shedding a little bit of my Magic collection, of when I was heavy into Standard and whenever. It was around the Guilds of Ravnica. Like, I got in at Dominaria in like 2018, and moved my way backwards to whatever was Standard legal, all the way back to like Kaladesh, Aether Revolt, stuff like that. All the dual lands. To be, if you want to be competitive, you need to have all of those dual lands times 4 in order to have a competitive Standard deck. So now, when I'm sort of shedding it, now I just play Commander, so I'm only legally allowed any 1 copy. So it's like, okay, I have 4 breeding pools. I can dump 3 of them and, make back, they sell for a decent amount of money. They're like $20 a piece, depending on where you get them or whatnot. So it's all right. I sold 3. That's $60. Like, that's not bad. But, you look back and it's like, these are risks that you take, because for every breeding pool, I have about 10 penny rares that are complete garbanzo, and, there's nothing I can do about it. But yeah, like, that's one thing that really scares me. And I want to talk a little bit about also first edition versus Unlimited. I know that, they just announced that what the date is for the release of Unlimited Tales of Aria, which is November 12th, or that the information's out there now. For me, I, like you, am one who plays card games because I enjoy the card game. I enjoy the interaction, the brain flexing that you do, the exercise you get with your mind, like the puzzle solving, just the fact that you're playing a card game. I just love that. The fact that there's this entire other subculture of card games where it's, especially in paper, obviously, where, what's the EV on this box? Like, if the EV on this box is $112, but I'm buying it for $95, I got some profit margins there. I got $17 of profit I can make. But then, is it really like that just doesn't appeal to me. And what I worry about with Tales of Aria and moving forward with this game is that, like you said, like what initially kind of had you hesitant to join the game is what might make others hesitant to join the game, because there's this sort of chasm now between first edition and Unlimited, where if there's any kind of important event, any kind of competition that is sort of sandwiched between those two dates, it is going to be a situation of who can afford to buy those cards, buy out cases, make the pulls you need to have the competitive cards you have, or overpay for the singles when the competitive season comes out. I am absolutely not a fan of this first edition Unlimited time gap between the two, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on this, because you already mentioned that the price of entry for this is a little bit of a turnoff to a degree, and does this just compound on that?
I mean, it does, but it's not the actual system that bothers me. So I actually don't have any problem with the theoretical first edition versus Unlimited rollout. I say theoretical because that's assuming no outside influence, right? In a vacuum, first edition run, you can buy whatever you want from it. And then from then on, you've got this Unlimited run that just is never ending. It's truly unlimited. They print it as needed, as long as, the game is out, essentially. I have no problem with that as a model without outside influence. But the problem that we are experiencing now, I actually think that it was a lot better this time around for Tales of Aria, and I'm hoping that over time it continues to get better. But the problem is that LSS is a great studio. I love Legend Story Studios, but they are also small. They are not Wizards of the Coast. And so their initial print runs for things are just going to be smaller, because they probably have to watch their margins a little bit better and account for player size. And that includes growth, but you're kind of doing a guessing game. Yes, there's predictive modeling. It's one of the things I do for my day job, but it's impossible to get that stuff 100% correct. And so you have to be conservative, et cetera, et cetera. And then on top of that, you have to remember that those first couple of sets were heavily impacted by the pandemic and supply chain shortages and things like that, which probably meant they were even smaller as well. Because of the pandemic, we saw a large explosion in people picking up collectibles again, which artificially inflated demand for a short period, which then meant the investors jumped in because of the inflation, and then they further artificially inflated it. And so you get a bunch of folks that don't even play Flesh and Blood, right? These are just outside investors that buy up a bunch of the first edition stuff and then they sit on it. And again, in theory, I don't have a problem with those things, except for it cascades into affecting your new players. The investors are actually shooting themselves in the foot by doing this, because their stuff would be worth more if you get more people to play the game. That's the best way to increase your demand for anything, is to just increase your player pool. So what happens is that these first edition runs are not being sold for MSRP. That's just what happens, even at local game stores.
Right.
And so I don't 100% blame the local game stores, but I blame them a lot. I'm going to go with like a 90% blame on the local game stores, because they know that they can get, 150 per box or whatever. And so they do that, but that's not MSRP. MSRP is like $90 a box. And so I'm lucky. I'm going to throw a shout out to my local game store, because I paid MSRP for my Tales of Aria first edition, $90 a box for 2 cases. And it wasn't because I'm a special customer or a big spender. It's not because I'm like a known person. That's the price they gave to everybody who pre-ordered, and they did it whether you ordered 1 box or multiple cases or whatever. But that's the way that it should be.
Yeah, but you're the vast minority. Like, you are the
vast
minority.
Like, I am the vast minority, because not only is it a bunch of local game stores not doing that, but even these big nationwide chains, they're also jacking up the price. And so what happens is then that prices out a bunch of people, and it kind of creates this artificial scarcity in many ways. And so the folks who need those cards for the big events, like right now is the perfect example, right? We've got Callings coming up, and then we have the National Championship, and Unlimited for Tales of Aria will not be available until after those events. So if you want to play in those events right now, one way or the other, you have to pay first edition prices for stuff. That shouldn't be a big issue if first edition prices are only inflated the way that they're supposed to be or intended to be. Now, I'm not talking about things that might be, limited print runs. So the alternate art channel, like Frigid, for example, I think is the way that you should do chase cards. It's alternate art, so there's a regular version if you want it. And if you want to only do that in first edition and make that a chase card or whatever, that's fine. Have at it. But the other things that people are kind of like chasing that will be available on Unlimited are kind of artificially inflated right now, because it's the only way you can get them, and because it's the only way you can get those cold foil versions. And so, if you want to play Oldhim and you want the shield, you're shelling out, $200 plus for a single card just so you can go play at an event. And that's what people see. When you are a new player and you're getting ready to dive in, you're seeing these artificially inflated prices that I think long term will go down, right? When we finally get print runs that match our player pool, and when LSS is less impacted by supply chain shortages and things like that, and when investors realize, like, okay, the gold rush, if you will, the early sets have came and went, and it's less lucrative for us to just mass buy, hundreds of cases and sit on them, I think things will settle down and it'll be better. But we're in this really awkward period. And so, like, right now, I think the first edition portion feels really rough. But like I said, in theory, in a vacuum, I'm fine with it. If they want to do chase cards like long term, and they still want those to be the sorts of things that are high value on the secondary market, I would like to see them maybe do those as a secondary buy somehow, right? So like maybe you've got your first edition of sets, and then you could also have like the collector's edition that's a small print run.
Right.
You can inflate those prices. You can put alternate arts in it or whatever. I'd also be fine with that if they want to go that route. But I also, like I said, I think right now I'm fine with first edition as soon as supply chain stuff is fixed and the investors stop turbo buying everything, thinking that they can, flip and make their money. Now, like I said, it got better with Tales of Aria because very quickly the prices crashed after the first set because I think people over ordered. But we're still probably a year away from things truly settling down at a minimum.
I think that the first edition slash unlimited, the idea, the principle of it is perfectly fine. I think the execution of what they want to do here is incorrect. I think that, like you said, there's this, first of all, let's just back this up again to the fact that, like you said, USA Nationals are taking place on November 5th to 7th. As of, I just checked now, Canadian Nationals finally got a date that just was released most recently, November 13th, 14th. One of these Nationals is occurring before Unlimited is released. One is happening a couple days later. I'm not saying that, that one extra day, that one day after release is a lot of time, but the people already have the decks that they want to play. So a lot of them might be like, you know what, I'm going to get my unlimited product. I'll be able to get these. I don't need to pay, $15 for a first edition Channel Lake Frigid, let's say, when I can get the unlimited print for $8 or something like that. I'm just making this up. I have no idea what the market value is. For the record, just to sort of further accentuate the fact that I'm kind of oblivious when it comes to what the value is of a card besides its usefulness in a deck, I have an alternate art Channel Lake Frigid that someone had to point out to me because I was going to trade it because I usually trade my foil Majestics for plus value on other cards, other Majestics, so I could just have play sets of things, until someone pointed out, that's alternate art. Don't trade that until you know exactly what it's worth. I was going to trade it for whatever a foil Channel Lake Frigid was worth, and I'm glad that some people stopped me for that. But when it comes to being oblivious to this stuff, that's me. But the value of some of these cards and the accessibility of it, because the USA people are not going to have access to those to the unlimited print, so they're going to have to overpay for certain cards to fill out their play sets of certain cards that might be expensive in Tales of Aria, and other people are going to be able to have access to the unlimited print. I think that the idea of a first edition print is perfectly fine. I think that there needs to be a situation where it's like, okay, this is the first day our printers printed these cards. This is the supply of it. It's out there. If you want to put a premium on it, and again, like you said, 90% of this goes towards 90% of the blame goes to the vendors, because there's a clear MSRP, but vendors are not stupid. They're going to see the demand and they're going to hike the price. Every single local game store that I went to inquire about Tales of Aria First Edition was easily twice the price of what a unlimited box would be. That includes the sponsors of this show, Red Riot Games. I'm not letting anybody off the hook on this. It's a true fact. However, Red Riot Games did have the lowest price, which was still about twice the price of an unlimited box. It's just the reality of it. I think that what they maybe want to do is release, if it's a first edition thing that people care about, these are the first wave of cards, have a special stamp or mark on a first edition print, sell them for more, but have the unlimited come out at the same time. Or like you said, have a collector's edition of stuff with alternate arts that are only in those sets or whatever. Like Magic does like these collector packs, I think. I think they're most prominent in Throne of Eldraine, where you pay more for a pack, but in the pack it's like, okay, you get 3 foils, you get 3 alternate arts, you get this or that, extended art, stuff like that. I think that's the way that they should go, because anything that kind of cuts off accessibility to the product is an immediate turnoff, and it could be just a gunshot to the foot when it comes to growing your game.
Yeah, so part of the reason that I had mentioned like trying to print for your margins, I think this is where the issue with the first print run comes, right? Because from the business side of things, LSS, they see gem IDs, right? They know the rough amount of players they have in their events as people participate and compete and they play the game. And so even if you factor in, okay, we have X number of, active gem IDs that are playing, and then, we also want to accommodate for some new players or things like that, they can come up with a number that they submit to their printers and say, hey, make this much for our first wave, because all of that stuff has to be printed and then like finalized before it ships out. And then they have to submit another order to the printers, right? That's where your unlimited kicks off later. And so that time in between is really governed by how much they proceed to order from the printers for that first run, right? That's the reason they do it this way. The issue then is the outside investors, because if LSS was just banking on like, hey, we have this number of gem IDs, these are ordering habits, whatever, if you're not accommodating for those outside influences, I don't even think we would feel the hit of a difference between first edition and not. I truly don't. The problem is that LSS, they submit their order, and even if they're trying to accommodate for like investors or whatever, once they submit that order, and then, some, MTG finance, alpha investor, whatever dude decides to like order 100 cases and sit on it, well, then that's like 100 cases that just never hit the market. And if 2 or 3 or 10 or 100 people do that, then that wildly messes up your ability to predict how much you need for that first print run. And so that's why I was also trying to say, there's some blame here on outside investors, the people that are buying product and then just sitting on it. All of that product that just sits in a case because people are using that as like, a long-term investment. It's a speculative thing. Well, that's product that LSS expected to hit the market, and it's just not circulating, right? That is currency for the game, if you will, that is just not hitting the market. And so we don't get that trickle down effect. God, I hate that term. But we don't get that, right? It's just sitting there. And so I think that's part of the reason, like I was saying, that we are having the problem we're having, because people are still in the mindset that it is more lucrative for me to sit on this because of the way it was at the start of Flesh and Blood.
Right.
But I think that we're very quickly moving to where that's not the case, and we just need more people to realize it. So the outside investors either order less, or your everyday people order less. Like I personally know folks that play the game that also are still just sitting on sealed product, right? That's still more product that didn't hit the market, which would be affecting those secondhand prices and would be affecting how much was needed before that unlimited print run kicked in. So I think that it's definitely, game stores and or online vendors jacking up prices just for greed reasons. Like, let's be honest, they're making a quick buck. And yes, I know you can say, well, they're doing it because people are paying it and supply and demand and all that. But I want the game to grow, right? So I just want more people playing the game, and then that will, I think, be healthier for the game long term. But yes, it's absolutely that. And then it's people just sitting on unopened product. Those are the two things that I think are drastically hurting us as far as accessibility when somebody wants to get in the game. And it's better now than it was in the past, and it's still pretty rough. If you are a brand new player and you want to build like a classic constructed competitive deck, we're talking, hundreds and hundreds of dollars even now at this point to do that. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some decks you can play with, some substitutions, some commons, but they are not going to be as powerful as the counterparts with the legendaries. So, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. That's not ideal. That's not what you want to do if you want to go and compete at a calling.
Yeah, I played one game with Ninja without a Mask of Momentum, and it was a joke. Like, it was just actually a joke. Like, I had it in the mail, and it was, like, it was on, I purchased it. It was on the way, but I had to go to a tournament without it. It was a small stakes little armory tournament, but I went without it, and it just, you feel absolutely ridiculous until somebody actually felt bad for me and lent me theirs. They're like, just take mine for today. And it's like, okay, like I appreciate it. Like, completely different ball game. I like, but the thing about it is that legitimately, like you said, the local game stores kind of have this advantage of being able to have the product directly. Like, they have essentially the access to the supply, and then they are the ones who, I hate to use the term scalping us for it, but I mean, there's a reason why it's so high. Like, we don't even, I see the resellers on, on, let's say, not even eBay or whatever, but like on Discord groups or on Facebook groups where people are selling their cases and it's more than they paid for. Like, they were able to get a decent deal for it, and they're coming in, like, they paid $150 a box,
yeah,
and they're selling them for $190 a box, let's say. Again, you and you use USD, I use Canadian dollars at the same time. I paid $200 flat per box, so I got a whole case for $800 Canadian. I was seeing people trying to resell, but that's purely because that was the best deal that I can get through, literally, it was like, I felt like some kind of, like, back alley kind of weird shady dude that I have to go through. I had to get through some different connections until somebody introduced me to somebody who bought, this person legit just bought like 50 cases and was selling them at a profit, and this was just the cheapest that I can get. So, but like I'm either getting scalped by this person for cheaper, or I'm getting absolutely scalped but have to pay tax to the game store who is doing the exact same thing that everyone else is doing.
Yeah, that's part of what frustrates me, right? Because I couldn't help but think throughout this Tales of Aria process, right? This was the first big first edition launch since I started playing the game. I couldn't help but think about what young me would have done, because young me wouldn't have just ordered 2 cases. I ordered 2 cases for me. I opened all of my product. It's all open. I'm playing with it. I got most of what I wanted.
Tell them about your huge hits for the record.
So I 2 cases got me 3 legendaries and 2 Corshams, and then I traded one of my extra Corsham for 2 more Tales Legends, a Stormstrider boots because I wanted to build Kano, and then some cash on top of it. So the only thing from Tales of Aria that I'm missing right now is the Oldhim Shield, the Rampart, and I basically have a set out of my 2 cases, right? So yeah, I got what I wanted to play the game, and that was enough for me. But young me, knowing that there was going to be scalping and knowing that I was basically getting it at MSRP, I couldn't help but think like, well, gee, why am I ordering 2 cases when I could be ordering, 20 or 40 cases? And even if I only want 2 cases for me, and so this is like the problem with the scalping thing, right? Like, even if I only want like 2 cases for me, I could open my 2 cases and sell the rest and make money to pay for the cases that I opened. But on top of that, I'd probably make enough money to buy future cases of future product. But I'm doing so like at the expense of kind of hosing other people, right? Because they're not getting the same opportunity as me just because I'm lucky enough to have a local game store that isn't trying to price me out of playing the game. So like it is kind of frustrating, because even now today on Facebook groups that I belong in where there's secondhand deals and trading, there's still boxes and cases and all sorts of stuff that are going wildly above MSRP. I still pretty routinely, in American dollars, like I said, I paid $90 per box, and it's common to see them anywhere between like $125 and $150 per box secondhand right now. So
yeah, the difference is that young Charmer is thinking about this, but for those who don't want to have to resort to this secondhand market of paying that premium on top from a scalper, typically a lot of their recourse is patience. I'm going to be patient until it gets restocked, and I'm going to go every morning. Let's say I'm going to check the stock on this website for this game store or whatever. I'm going to do my this is I used to do this because I used to be a huge Star Wars figurine collector, and I got out of that fast. But there was a time where I was basically, if there was a particular figurine I was missing, I would, on certain weekends or the days that I knew that they'd get new product, I would every morning I'd wake up and I'd go to I'm like, this is my trek. I'm going to go to these 6 stores and I'm going to look to see if this one that I'm missing is there. I wouldn't buy them all. I would buy the one I wanted, but that was me. I wasn't going to go on eBay and overpay. I wasn't going to do this. My recourse was patience. There's a lot of people out there who cannot even rely on that because they are not able to even be immune to the scalping, because these big box retailers that are already completely established in, be it in the US or whatever, this is that, they're already jamming up the prices from MSRP and they're on board with that. They're part of the whole culture of, I got it, I don't need it, but you're going to want it and you're going to pay out your ass for it. I don't have that backup plan and nobody does, frankly, because it's hard to find any of this at MSRP. You got lucky. You're in a vast minority, but I would say that 98% of places out there who are selling product, if they get it in stock, are jacking up that price because of it. So it's the same feeling I had of buying product from a reputable retailer online was the same feeling I had meeting a dude outside of a McDonald's parking lot, to give him cash for the product off of Craigslist or something, You
got my McTails?
Yeah, exactly. McTails of Aria, perfect. Extra sauce, thank you. Just like ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm not loving it. Exactly. So that's the case. Like young Charmer who is thinking about this, the foil to that is patience. I'm going to wait till it gets back in stock. But now there's not even that recourse because everybody who receives the stock already is on board with a little bit of the, take it and, full Muppetization of what's going on here. So anyway, that's just a little problem. I think that this is one of their major issues that they need to nip in the butt is accessibility to this, and the fact that everybody's on board with this. This whole mantra, this whole culture of these I am owning these cards and putting them in cold storage for whatever, because when I'm 20 years down the line, I want a Camaro or something like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But there is no alternative route for the players who are like, I don't care. I want the card that is legal for me to play so I can play it with my friends, in a tournament or whatever. Because people right now are just proxying and printing stuff to play around the kitchen table or with their buddies. But if you want to go to a tournament, you're screwed.
It's extra hard for somebody like me. Like, one of the big draws for collectible card games for me is that I also just like to collect. Like, the actual collecting of stuff brings me enjoyment, not the, this is worth, thousands of dollars. Like, I'm the weird guy that, speaking of expensive stuff, like I used to own a blue Hurricane, but when I first picked it up, I bought one because it was like a neat misprint. Like, I didn't even know that they were expensive at the time, and I found it at a show. And then when I got back, one of my buddies was like, "Hey man, like, by the way, this is really expensive."
What is a blue Hurricane? I do not know.
It's early Magic set had a misprint where all of the Hurricanes, or at least a chunk of them, were on the blue framing, but they were still Hurricanes, so like it was still a green card. And they are, they are at least back then. I don't know if they are now. Actually, I'll have to look into it. But like, there was a time when they were crazy expensive because of how limited they were, and I just thought it was neat. And like the Channel Lake Frigid is a great example. I really want an alternate art Channel Lake Frigid. I just don't want one $300 enough right now.
Oh, is that where they're at? Because maybe I will sell.
Yeah, the last time I looked, that's what they were at, and I just want one because I like the alternate art. I like the little fox. I'm a big fan of fall as the season, so I like the red leaves and things like that. I know that it's meant to be spring, mind you, because it's like the channel is melting and whatever, or not the channel, the lake. You're channeling Lake Frigid, mind you. But I would like one because I like the art, and there's a lot of playmats. That's another thing that is ridiculous to me as well, right? There's a lot of playmats for Tales of Aria that I would really like because I think that they're pretty cool art. The Channel Lake Frigid one is one of them, but like, I'm not paying hundreds of dollars for a playmat. I'm just not, which is exactly why I'm using this ugly thing, this brown. I mean, it's not ugly.
It's not ugly at all.
But like, this is functional, and it's what I use until I go to one of these calling events, and then I might use one of them. But I would love to like collect stuff like that. There's the part of me that loves collecting, and when these prices get artificially inflated, it locks out those of us that also want to collect just for the sake of collecting and not for monetary value. There's a part of me that really wishes that the game was more akin to, I don't know, like, do you remember Pogs?
Of course I remember Pogs.
Yeah.
That's
right?
where Alf came back. Alf came back in Pog form.
Yeah, like even your expensive Pogs weren't really expensive, and I wish it was more like that, But
I feel you. Like, where like the high end kind of card is like, wow, that's like $20. Like, that's insane,
Hey, I'm old enough to remember. I remember saving a ton of money for my first Shivan Dragon. It was an unlimited one at the time, and it was $20. And I remember like having to convince my mom that it was still worth it to buy that at $20.
And when you think about it, it's like, that's not even a play set. It's just one. It's just a single one, and you have to draw it, and then it has to live. And I completely, I feel that, like, the impact of what a $20 price tag back then versus now, because I remember when I first got really into card games was with like Young Jedi was one of them, and Darth Maul was the the top dog card. It was the most powerful card, and it was the highest priced card at a right now laughable $20. You know, like think about what the most powerful potential card is in this card game, as fresh as it is still with, you know, 4 or 5 expansions or whatever. And it's the most expensive cards are, you know, in the hundreds of dollars, in the potentially even, you know, I guess the Korshims or whatever are you know, those the locations are a little bit higher up there, but $20 is $20, and it's cute to think that back in the day that was a lot of freaking money for clowns like us, just, you know, perusing through high school looking to play card games.
Yeah, it was, and it started to add up really quickly. Like I remember when Ravnica first came out, like the very first Ravnica, when we got our Shocklands, and that was like a big deal that we had cards in standard that were $20 a pop at time, you know. I laugh at how expensive things have gotten, and I laugh just to avoid crying, because that's the reality.
Well, if people are willing to pay for something, then I guess there's intrinsic value to it to a degree. But one of the most shocking things for me was paid $5 to enter like a CC tournament, Armory or whatever, went 4-0, won a playmat and a cold foil, and someone's like, I'll give you $150 for all of that. It's like, what? Like, oh, are you kidding me? Like, I was just flabbergasted, because this is just this is sort of the subculture of it that I'm not aware of and not really in tune for. And I declined, because I was like, every time someone just immediately throws something at you, like, you always feel like you're getting screwed. I've had bad experiences in these kinds of situations. I'm just like, no, it's cool. Like, I'm happy with, I just want to take my cold foil Titan's Fist and my lighted up playmat and go home and feel good, or my cold foil Shiver or whatever the hell it was. And like, I'm happy with this, but the playmat thing is like another element to it. You know, there's this market for playmats, and it's, I mean, I have like 5 or 6 playmats. Some I've won, some I've bought 1 or 2, but at the end of the day, it's just like, it's a mouse pad, you know, like with a picture on it.
Yeah.
So again, if you want to boil it down, it's just cardboard with ink on it, and it's a whole different game, man. And speaking of games, Mr. Charmer, we have a game called Go Again, and I'm hoping that you'll stay with us after the break, that perhaps you would like to play some Go Again.
Yeah, we can play some Go Again.
All right, cool. So we'll be back after this message from our sponsors at Red Riot Games. We'll be back with Charmer to play some Go Again. The Instant Speed Podcast is brought to you by Red Riot Games, my favorite place to play Flesh and Blood. Now, with Tales of Aria going full throttle, you're going to need to round out your new elemental deck with a few singles here and there. Maybe you need an extra Blink or a Channel Lake Frigid, or maybe you're hunting for a decent price on some Ranger equipment. Either way, Red Riot Games gives you the best prices on singles and a slew of awesome playmats to show off who your favorite hero is. You can help out the Instant Speed Podcast by checking out Red Riot Games through the link in the description. All right, it's time to go wide on Charmer as we go again on a series of questions, rapid fire style. Now, Charmer, you're allowed to elaborate on these. There's no sort of, you know, give the answer you want to give. There's no time limit. This isn't like a lightning round kind of situation, but you know,
sure.
we got a bunch to get through. So if you're ready, let me know and we'll go again.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go again. Let's get these action points rolling.
All right. Well, with my first action, and we will ask you, why is there a 3 in your screen name?
Because the E was taken. Charmer comes from when I used to play League of Legends, and I was playing a lot of Ari at the time. I'd used several other screen names, but you used to be able to change them. I think it was like once a year or something. And so at the time, I was playing a bunch of Ari, and so I wanted to be called Charmer because one of her key abilities is a charm, and the E was taken. So I used a 3, and it's stuck. So here I am.
I've always wanted to do a podcast series of bringing people on where we go in depth as to their screen names and their origins of their screen names. And some of them are, I actually kind of did a little pilot mission of I reached out to a bunch of people. And one of them that I reached out to was Jeff Hoogland. whose screen name is Jeff Hoogland. I'm like, can you let me know about how you came about this name? And he's like, are you serious? I'm like, listen, it's more for the comedic value of just you telling me that it's your name. And he just looks directly at the camera. He's like, yeah, it's my name. I'm like, okay, perfect. Yeah. Got it. Yep. Cut.
If I knew that I was going to end up making content and casting and doing those things, I probably would have used my name, because my first name is rather unique. There's like one other well-known person who has the first name Darick that spells it the same way. It's Darick Robertson, the comic book artist for The Boys and many other works you might know. Does Batman stuff, does a bunch of great work. But outside of him, it's just me. So if I could do it again, I'd probably have went with Darick. But content and casting and things like that were not in my mind at the time. I fell into all of that by accident. And so, yeah, I'm Charmer now forever.
Well, it was either that or Charmer with the E, but it was like Charmer _, like 69420 Purple Kush XXX or something like that, right? I mean, depends when you made it, but
I never did that kinds of thing. The one I was changing it from, so like to give you an example, the one I was changing it from was Lurkle.
Like
that was a
Steve
D&D
Lurkle?
Name. No, kind of. It was Lirkel, and it's an anagram for killer, and it was chosen because that was a D&D character name that I had used, right? So like I played an assassin in D&D, and so like for that year or whatever it was that I had that screen name, that's what it was. And back when I played lots of like World of Warcraft, it was Lotho for a long time because that was also a D&D character that I had used. Just usually me reusing something that I'm doing at the time. Unfortunately, with Charmer, then I started making content, and once you do that, you're like kind of locked in. You don't get many opportunities to rebrand yourself. So I've just been Charmer ever since. And not only that, but there's been times where I've been working events and I've been on the desk and everybody else on the desk is using their real name. So I was doing the Elder Scrolls Legends Master Series, and I remember for one of the days on the broadcast, it was like me and Christian, who worked for Bethesda at the time, and then my podcast and content partner, Justin Larson, who used his real name. And then we were also joined on the desk by Raptor, who you may know from the Magic community, MTG Hall of Famer. He's also a game dev, but he was using his real name as well on the broadcast. And so I said during our pre-show, I said, hey, you know, should I use my full name? I'm literally the only one not using my name, and I'm totally fine with it. Like, I don't try to hide who I am. And all three of them gave a resounding, no, you're just Charmer. So even if I wanted to get out of it, at this point, I can't.
No, you're locked in. I've been Flake for 22 years, and it's just like I can't not. I've been it more than I've not been it. So you're locked in. You're Charmer forever and always. Yep. That might perhaps lead to you being Charmer in another broadcasting gig that maybe you have your eye on down the road. What would be your dream non-esports broadcasting gig?
Right now, today, Flesh and Blood. Hello, Legend Story Studios.
Okay.
Are you hiring?
All right. Well,
that's not esports, mind you. It is a physical card game, and this counts. But if it's not that, if we're talking something else, I'm a big fan of meat sports. I love football. I'd love to do football play-by-play or color commentary, but they usually reserve that to players. I really enjoy that. So I think that would be my answer.
That's a good one. I guess you did totally lawyer me on that one. Flesh and Blood is not an e-sport. It's like I don't even know if that what would it characterize it now anymore. Like if it's a paper game but it's not electronic, is it a sport anymore? I mean, if darts can be a sport, so can this, right? I suppose. Sure. Proudest achievement in your life, Mr. Charmer?
Oh man, existing.
It's not easy.
That's a tough one.
It's definitely not easy. Hey, more power to you, especially these days. It's not exactly easy to just get out there.
It's one of those, like, I didn't necessarily have like a bad childhood, but I was the first person on, you know, my direct lineage that graduated from college, and let's just say circumstances have led many people to not end up where I'm at. So, you know, the fact that I have a good job and a career, and then outside of my day job and career, I also have a nice career with esports and content creation. I've got a wife and 2 beautiful children, and, you know, things are relatively stable. Like, that's honestly my proudest achievement is just that I didn't mess things up too bad. So I know it's boring.
That's
but
not boring at all. That's impressive, and there's a lot of people, myself included, that one day that might be that significantly outshines the fact that I have a complete collection of black bordered Star Wars cards, first print from Decipher in the mid 90s. I mean, happy, healthy family and successful career, Star Wars
but
cards.
I don't have a black bordered Jedi training deck, Flake. Come on now.
Well, no. I mean, if you want to go down the Jedi training route, that only got fleshed out with special edition with the objectives called Mind What You Have Learned / Save You It Can. I'm getting into the weeds here when it comes to this. Star Wars is my all-time favorite card game. That is just the fact. A hero that you might not be good with or you might not think is good, but you're just stubborn enough to keep playing it anyways.
Dorinthia. I think Dorinthia is very appealing to me because she has one of the more unique play styles, and anytime that you can make flavor of a hero stand out. So like Kano comes to mind as well. He's very flavorful, obviously not really using real attack actions. You're using non-attack actions to do everything and very combo oriented. He's kind of like a mad wizard. So I like Kano, but I think for me it's Dorinthia just because she's, I think, very strong when you're playing against players that are learning the game or don't know how to play against Dorinthia. She punishes misplays very hard. But once you play against a player that has played against Dorinthia, I think she's not very good. But I just love her play style anyway. It's very interactive in a way that a lot of the other heroes aren't. The reprise mechanic in general, where you're kind of daring them to block you, and so there's an element of bluff and mind games that occurs there that just isn't as apparent for the other classes. It's definitely there, but more so with her specifically, I think, than any other. So I keep trying to make her work, and then it ends up just kind of like staying at the kitchen table because it's just not good enough right now. But that's my pet project.
Yeah, Dorinthia is the one where you're like, one of my first experiences with it is just seeing the Dawnblade. It's like a Dawnblade for 3, and then the player will then block it for 9, and you're like, oh, okay.
Right.
Kind of see where this is going. Yeah, whether you have it or not.
I enjoy her because it's that mind game, right? What I call the naked Dawnblade is something that you have to, on the other side, really say like, all right, do I think they've got a lot of buffs? How many? Am I okay with taking this hit and then just stopping the second one? What is my game plan here? And something so simple as just a Dawnblade for 3 offers so many potential decision trees for both players. And I think that's why I enjoy Dorinthia. I think she really highlights some of the complexity or potential complexity for Flesh and Blood for new players. But also, unfortunately, unlike some of the other heroes, once you kind of figure out how to play against her, her effectiveness goes down pretty significantly, right? So
yeah, you're capitalizing on an opponent's mistakes, and better players with experience will not make those mistakes. Also, the Naked Dawnblade was the alternative name for this podcast. We settled on Instant Speed, but the Naked Dawnblade was... You know what?
I think it would be a great name for a bar.
Oh, you know what? Within the Flesh and Blood lore and that sort of universe of building, there should be some sort of tavern called the Naked Dawnblade, where everyone is like, it's a no PvP kind of environment. Everyone in there, everyone's welcome. Welcome to the Naked Dawnblade. Have yourself a drink, sit down, enjoy yourself. Your fave card game of all time. Mine. It's Star Wars by Decipher. But what is your favorite card game of all time?
It's, a brother from another mother. So Decipher Lord of the Rings.
Oh, that's my number 2. Great answer.
And the reason is because I still feel like the Twilight Pool resource system is one of the most interesting that I've ever experienced in a card game. When you really talk about that kind of like ebb and flow of a game, Flesh and Blood comes very close with the back and forth nature of just direct attacking your opponent and that you're using your hand for all phases of the game, right? That's one of the things I love about Flesh and Blood. Your hand is your resources, it's your attacks, it's your defenses, it's everything, and you got to make do with it. with Decipher for Lord of the Rings, for those of you who haven't played it, every time you played the game, you played both the good guys and the bad guys, if you will, right? So you were the Fellowship and a number of spooky minions that were trying to kill the Fellowship.
The Shadow,
so,
yeah. You played as both Fellowship and Shadow.
So when you are the Fellowship and you play a character or something that helps a character, whether it's a weapon or maybe ally, right? So you say, hey, I want Gandalf to help me, whatever the case may be. You put points into a pool. And then after you've made all your plays, you travel to a location. And the entire point of the game is you're either trying to get your Fellowship to the end, right? To Mount Doom, destroy the ring, or you're trying to kill the other Fellowship if you're on the other side. So you play cards, you go to a location, and there's 9 of them total. And when you go to a location, that puts more points into a pool. And then once you've done that, now it's the enemy, right? The Shadow. They get to take points out of the pool to play the minions to fight you. So there's very much that ebb and flow and that kind of like risk assessment you have to do where, yeah, I might be able to play Gandalf to help me, but then that means I might have to deal with a really powerful minion this round. Can I handle it, right? Do I think I can deal with that? And it was just one of the most unique game engines and mechanics that I'd ever experienced. No other game has come close to replicating it since. And it was also very near and dear to me because that was the first time that I was ever involved in any true like playtesting experience for a game. Done it a lot since then, but I was still kind of a young kid at that point, as a teenager. And Decipher, our group, were part of the playtesting groups for like the Two Towers sets and things that were coming. And so they would literally like email us like PDFs of cards, and then we would have to like print them out and cut out proxies and playtest, and then to send like reports back saying like this is too strong or whatever. And just being involved in that will always have like a special place in my heart. But I also just legitimately enjoyed the game. Like I played in the World Championships at Gen Con, and I traveled around for it, and it was crazy well designed. I'd love to see, even if with a different IP, somebody take that Twilight Pool mechanic and the site mechanic and replicate it for another game because it was outstanding.
Yeah, the multiple different avenues for a winning condition, be it you survive to Mount Doom on Site 9, or your opponent kills your ring bearer. There was various ways to win or lose. Not to mention the Aragorn Ranger of the North sort of solo bodyguard choke deck, Ranger's versatility, slam the bow on him. You're moving for relatively free. That was that was kind of like a Fellowship control to a degree, where you're just giving your opponent nothing to do.
Choke was busted, and we ended up getting like some stuff errated for that. And then when we were doing the play testing for like those Two Towers sets, I remember that was one of the things very specifically we gave feedback on was Ninja Golem. I don't know if you ever played that archetype, but there was a version where Gollum was just nutty, right? Like the Smeagol Frodo Sam deck was kind of bonkers, and
yes,
we were like, hey, this is going to be really strong, and then they did not heed our advice, and it got printed as we had tested it, and then that was pretty good as well.
Yeah, the amount of erratas that they came out with after like the tower block came out, like Ranger's versatility got nerfed, Mirror of Galadriel got nerfed. Now we're getting real deep into it. I'll start my Lord of the Rings TCG podcast at one point in my life. So what does Flesh and Blood get wrong then? I mean, you've been part of test groups. You're obviously well attuned to what a card game should or shouldn't do in most cases. What does Flesh and Blood get wrong?
Oh, that's a great question, because there are so many things that I think it does well. I love that it is degenerative and it puts you in the action right away. And I love the way they do their resource management. If anything, I would say that its biggest hurdles, and I don't even know if it's necessarily something they get wrong, they just don't have great existing avenues for it. But their biggest hurdles right now are just helping new players grasp concepts like very early on. And this is something you and I know have talked about like off podcast, but I think, for example, right now it's a crime that we don't have Welcome to Wrath blitz decks, because those are some of the simpler heroes to start with. And so if you're taking a new player and you're saying, you know, at your local game store, hey, the game's great, buy a Blitz deck or two, and then play with your friends at home and learn the game that way, because that's what you should be doing. But you give them like Prism and Briar or something with all of these really interesting interactions. That's a lot to throw, I think, at a new player very early on. And while the Ira welcome decks are toned down, right? I think that those are great for initial exposure. One, you can't say to somebody like, here, like pick up these welcome decks and take them home. But two, it's not a great starting place for a new player because they're not legal. And they don't really teach you enough about equipment and some of the other, I think, important things. And so there's this like weird middle ground in terms of exposing new players to the game to get them hooked that I don't think that they have quite hit yet. So that's one thing that I think that they get wrong. The other thing I think that they at least currently get wrong is in related to their intellectual property, right? So one of the reasons that Magic is even more successful today than it used to be was because somewhere along the lines, Wizards of the Coast realized that world building mattered, right? We started getting legendary creatures and legendary, you know, artifacts and things that made people say like, hey, you know, I keep seeing this recurring character. What does this mean? What does this do? And then they started expanding on that, and we got books, and we got all of these other kind of like supplemental things. Right now, we don't have that from Legend Story Studios, and I know that it's in part, you know, again, they're a smaller studio. They're just getting their foundation, and they were again impacted by so many things that created unforeseen adversities. And so like I'm very empathetic to that, but I want more of that. Like one of the things, again, talking about that whole like collector thing and things that keep me out, one of the things I would personally love is those books that they gave out as part of the initial like welcome packs to the store, right? The lore books, because I love that stuff. I eat that up. That's something I love, the art for the game, and I want to learn about the zones and the areas. And you know, there's spots I can go on the website, and I've definitely done that and read that stuff, but it only goes so far. I think tangible things that you can put in people's hands, and even more so, I think with the heroes themselves, is where they need to go for supplemental material. Because one of the big draws to this game is the fact that you start with a hero. And it very much reminds me of League of Legends. If you have ever played League of Legends or, you know, spent time around other people that play them, you hear phrases like, you know, I main Lux. And that just means they play that character more than anyone else, and they love that character. And so Riot makes all their money by selling skins and personalization all based on that character. And with this game, you have that opportunity to kind of like adopt one of your favorite heroes as a persona. And so I really feel like Legend Story Studios needs to give you more ways to fall in love with your favorite hero, and give people who main a hero already more reasons to be excited, right? So like if I'm a big Bravo guy, then I should be able to have like alternate art Bravo stuff.
Yeah.
Or, you know, yes, you can win them at events or whatever, but even if they just sold on their site like extra play mats that were Bravo oriented or things like that. And even more so, like if they had books and it was like the story of Bravo, I would eat that up. And I'm sure that I am far from being the only one. And so I want more stuff like that. Let them build this intellectual property, because all of the art is beautiful and I like what I've seen like from the world, and all it does is make me want to learn more. So like give me that. That's what I would like to see them like expand upon.
I've felt that in lieu of the Fabled being, you know, playable cards that sort of slide into certain archetypes or whatever, like the library, you know, in a Prism deck, it's very important in many cases. I always felt like those Fabled cards should not have an impact on any type of meta. I always felt that they should just be these incredibly awesome chase versions of the heroes of that particular set. So there's 3 of them. It should be a alternate art, full art version of the hero in cold foil, and I think that's how it should be, because you're not pushing anybody out. And again, for those of, like you said, I main this, I main that, I main Katsu. That's just how it is. Part of it is because I can't afford to build anything else at the moment, or I don't have everything I need to play something else. So that's the hero I adopted to flesh out and build and complete, and that's what I've done. But I also love that hero. I love that playstyle. I love playing as Katsu. I would absolutely, consider trading cards to get that alternate art foil awesome Katsu. But right now, a card like a Fabled that might fit into a particular deck, that just turns me off from playing that deck because that's just another $600 price tag to get to there. So let's say you have the opportunity to either play in a finals, a Flesh and Blood finals, or cast the Flesh and Blood finals. Which would you prefer?
There's technically no wrong answer, but I'm going to choose cast. And the reason I'm going to choose cast is because if I had picked play, I would only be wanting to play in a finals to put on my resume to get hired as a caster. Okay. At the end of the day, I really enjoy playing the game, and I love competing, and that's why I'm going to be going to the next 2 calling events. I'll be in Dallas and I'll be in Cincinnati, and I'm going to do that as a player. But I also love casting, and I love having an excuse to talk about games that I love, and I love covering, competition and things like that. And so if I'm ever given the choice, I will almost always choose cast over play when it comes to big events like that, because then I get to be a part of every round, and every round I get to talk about the game I love and be really excited for it and share my excitement and share my love with other people, get them excited for it. I feel like that is the kind of, advocate for a game that I want to be. I kind of want to be that steward for a game and for that experience. And so I would choose cast.
So where do you see Flesh and Blood in 5 years?
Ooh, hopefully at more local game stores and more events and, thriving. I don't think that it will die in 5 years. I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think it will grow. I don't think that it will ever hit MTG levels of success. And that's not a knock against Flesh and Blood or LSS or anybody involved. It's just a reality that there are certain windows of opportunity for games to reach a certain size, right? There has to be kind of a perfect storm of conditions that allow your game to get a certain level of inertia to get that level of momentum, right? Magic was the best designed and most successful game at a time when a number of games were trying to do the same thing, and it kind of weathered the storm. And at the time, there were no other big competitors, right? So there was room to grow. But now we live in a world where Magic already exists and Pokemon already exists, and there's a bunch of digital options that exist. And so the market share is just not the same, right? So when you think about games that become huge, a lot of it has to do with being, even if you're not first to market, you're the first successful one to market, right? So like first digital card games to market, you think about card games like Soulforge, or at least I do, but it wasn't as successful as Hearthstone because Hearthstone was just more accessible and it was on more devices and it had a better intellectual property and blah, 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 right? So it was the first successful one in that space, and then Hearthstone got huge. And so now every other digital card game is kind of living in Hearthstone's shadow, and it's not knocks against them. It's just that whether it's digital or physical card games, or honestly just any game franchise in general, there is that sunk cost fallacy that exists with people, right? And so if I've been playing Hearthstone for 7 years and a new game comes out and it's better, it's still really hard for a lot of folks to just give up Hearthstone and go play that other game. So we're in that same boat right now. There's probably a lot of people that are playing Magic that would love to play Flesh and Blood, but if you've been playing Magic the Gathering for 2 decades, it's a lot harder to give that up and just go like full on hardcore Flesh and Blood, right? So I think that Flesh and Blood will grow, and I think that it will find a place in the trading card community, and I think it will serve certain types of players better than even say like Magic the Gathering currently does. But I don't think that it'll become a juggernaut, because I just don't think that we're in a position where games like this will be a juggernaut like that ever again. And if they do become that, it will take decades to get there. So in 5 years, I think it'll still be around. I think that it'll be doing well for what I think would be reasonable expectations are, but I don't think that it'll be, the Magic killer. That's the big thing, right? You always hear like, what's the WoW killer? What's the Magic killer? What's the Hearthstone killer? Everybody cares about like, what's going to be the thing that knocks the game off the top. And the reality is you don't have to be the biggest to be successful. And that's all I want. I want LSS and the people behind Flesh and Blood to be successful because they deserve it. but you can be successful without being the biggest.
Well, we know though that it was not Artifact. That's for sure.
No, it was not Artifact.
Yeah, Artifact was not the magic killer as everyone thought it would be. Oh, Lord. Well, in 5 years, I believe, I still believe that the game will be great. And hopefully within those 5 years, you and I will finally get an opportunity to cast together. Like, that is something that I would love down the road. So, who knows? Maybe someone out there is listening to this and saying, you know what? These two clowns deserve a circus. So that's possibly out there.
Flake and I have both been covering card games and strategy games for years, and we have known each other for years, and we've even played the same games together, and we have never had an opportunity to cast together. It is an absolute crime. We have crossed paths in many communities and been at similar events, and we've never had a chance to cast together, so somebody needs to make it happen. And I think Flesh and Blood deserves us.
I think I certainly whatever that means exactly. Whether right. It's you know what, and flash forward 5 years where you and I are just like changing garbages at a major event, like that's probably where it's gonna be. But honestly, my man, thank you so much for being on the show, Darick Oswalt, aka Charmer. Always an insightful, well-articulated human being, and just one of the wholesome types out there. A pro's pro. I stand by that.
Well, I appreciate you for having me on. Thank you for having me, and we should do this again sometime.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I know that there's a lot that we have left on the table, but there's plenty more runway for this podcast, I believe, as well as this game. But for those who may not have you on their radar right now, my friend Charmer, where can they consume more of your consumables?
So I am Charmer, that's Charm3r on Twitch, and I also have a YouTube channel where I'm just Charmer, and that is traditionally Legends of Runeterra content. However, I have recently started a Flesh and Charm channel on YouTube that I think has like one public video posted because I'm still doing some editing and things behind the scenes, but that will have regular content in the near future. And then if you care about social media, in most places I'm that Charmer because Twitter won't give me my name.
Those bastards. I'm still waiting for not just like Flake on Twitter, but Flake on Twitch. Like both of these are two accounts that have not been touched for like a decade, and apparently I am not worthy.
The Charmer one really bothers me with Twitter because I own charmer.com. I do business under Charmer. I've sent them proof of that. The Charmer account on Twitter has been dead for like a decade. It's not active at all, and they refuse my request every time. So that one really frustrates me, but I feel you.
All right. Well, friends, thank you so much for tuning in to the Instant Speed Podcast, brought to you by Red Riot Games. We'll catch you very soon with our next guest, who is TBA, or 2TBD, or TB something. But friends, thanks again. Be kind to one another, and don't forget, you're not losing if you're learning, so keep playing the games. You might win them. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.